I never planned on picking a fight with a homeowners association, let alone watching them haul away my prize animals in the dead of night. If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be battling a group of clipboard-wielding suburbanites with a taste for tyranny, I would have laughed in their faces. But life is a funny way of making you face your worst fears. In my case, it started when I inherited my grandfather's farmland, tucked at the edge of a fancy new development. Picture a charming patch of rolling hills, wide open pastures, and a single dusty road leading to my wooden farmhouse. It was a place that spoke to my soul, and it was also the place the HOA wanted to swallow whole. For over 80 years, my family had lived outside the strict lines of any development or association. Our farm never needed to answer to neighborhood committees with their petty mandates about lawn heights or approved fence colors. Times changed, though, and the fancy folks in the city discovered this little slice of rural paradise. They built their McMansions on the ridge just beyond the farmland. Soon, they formed an HOA, and from my front porch, it looked like an army amassing to take over. The trouble started with a flimsy piece of paper pinned to my door. It had the HOA's logo, an outline of a new Highland Ridge community, and a short note demanding I attend a mandatory meeting. Mandatory? For me? I wasn't even in their brand new neighborhood. My property lines remained exactly where they'd been when my grandfather purchased them in 1939, and I never signed any document to join an HOA. As far as I was concerned, their petty rules about mailbox designs and approved horticulture had nothing to do with me. I shrugged it off and went about feeding my animals. The goats needed fresh water, the cows needed bales of hay, and the chickens, clucking their way across the yard, needed attention. My father always said that farmland is a full-time job. There's no day off when living things depend on you. So I ignored the meeting. I had chores to do, and the last thing on my mind was playing nice with a group of neighbors who probably couldn't tell a rooster from a hen. That turned out to be my first mistake. A week later, I heard a knock at my door. It was a well-dressed woman, hair in a tight bun, name tag polished to a shine, HOA President Linda Harvey. She clutched a binder under one arm. Without so much as a greeting, she stepped forward onto my porch, as though she owned it. "We were disappointed you missed our meeting," she said with the ice-cold politeness of someone used to getting her way. I leaned in the doorway, trying not to laugh. "I'm not a member." "So, no, I didn't attend." She flipped open her binder to a map, showing the new subdivision, hugging the edges of my pasture. According to county records, the Highland Ridge HOA's jurisdiction extends to these coordinates, which includes a majority of your farmland. She tapped the map with a manicured nail and lifted her chin triumphantly. "We're prepared to offer you membership at a discounted rate." I pressed my lips together, stalling the urge to lose my temper. "I don't care what your map says. This is my land. My grandfather built this farmhouse. We've never been under your oversight. I have no interest in joining." Her smile sharpened. "I'm sure we can come to an arrangement. It's in everyone's best interest to maintain uniform standards, especially with livestock so close to our properties. We wouldn't want any complaints about odors or unsightly conditions." I'd been in more than my share of tough scrapes, but this was new territory. I felt a prickle of indignation run from my neck to my fingertips. She was calling my animals, my family's heritage, an eyesore. Rather than pick a fight right there on my porch, I told her politely but firmly to leave. With a tight-lipped grin, she handed me a business card from her binder and turned on her heel. A few days later, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was a formal notice stating that livestock on or within HOA borders must meet certain containment standards, or I'd face fines. The letter demanded immediate payment for mandatory membership fees, plus a special assessment for each farm animal. The sum was mind-boggling, more than I earned in 3 months. I tore the letter in half and dropped in the trash. That's when my phone started ringing. The HOA called me nonstop, threatening legal action if I didn't comply. I told them to pound sand. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. Little did I know how far they'd go to prove their point. One chilly evening, I came home from a trip to the feed store to find my driveway blocked by 2 luxury SUVs with a Highland Ridge logo on the doors. My cows were grazing in the pasture. The horses were in the stable, but my goats and chickens were nowhere in sight. My eyes roamed the yard, frantic, searching for any sign of them. Then I saw a group of men in polo shirts loading crates into a livestock trailer at the edge of my property. I dropped the bags of feed and sprinted over, my heart lodged in my throat as I watched them toss my squawking chickens and bleating goats into the trailer like cargo. When I started yelling, they pretended not to hear. But the second I was close enough to demand answers, two of them hopped into the SUVs. The last guy left me with a slip of paper in my hand, covered in fine print. "They're being confiscated," he said, almost apologetically. "Failure to pay assessed fees and refusal of HOA membership violates local regulations. The animals will be taken for safekeeping until you become compliant." I watched, thunderstruck, as they sped away, my beloved animals rattling around in that trailer. They had stolen my livestock as leverage to force me into joining their ridiculous HOA. In that moment, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. They had no clue who they were dealing with. If they thought I'd just roll over and accept their demands, they were dead wrong. I was ready for war. I've seen strong-arm tactics in my life, but never from an organization that's supposed to protect the quality of a neighborhood. I'll tell you what, the only thing that needed protection was my farm animals. Protection from those phony bureaucrats parading around as good neighbors. My nerves were shot from the minute they roared off with my livestock. I was so furious I could barely think straight. But anger is a powerful motivator if you know how to use it. My first call was to the local sheriff's department. I explained how a group of people claiming to be part of the HOA illegally took my goats and chickens off my property. I expected immediate action. Police cars, sirens, the whole shebang. Instead, I got an officer on the phone who responded with a bored sigh. "Is your property within their jurisdiction?" she asked mechanically, as if she'd heard this story before. "No," I barked. "My grandfather owned this farm free and clear before that subdivision was even a thought." She hummed in that way that suggests she was scanning a computer screen. "I see a recent rezoning for that area. Highland Ridge filed a petition stating your farmland fell under their regional authority. They claim you refuse to pay fines and refuse membership. According to our records, the HOA is within its rights to remove non-compliant assets." Non-compliant assets? I nearly crushed my phone in my hand. These are living creatures. They don't belong to some association. They're mine, and I never agreed to their terms. The officer's sigh deepened. "This might be something you'll need to handle in civil court, sir. My advice is to contact an attorney. The HOA has more legal muscle than you might think." I hung up, my blood boiling. So that was it. The authorities were basically shrugging their shoulders, leaving me on my own. Fine, I thought. I'd been on my own most of my life. I didn't need official badges to fight my battles. After slamming my phone onto the kitchen table, I let myself collapse into the old rocking chair my grandpa used to sit in. Outside, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across an empty yard where my goats and chickens should have been. I felt a surge of guilt. Maybe if I had taken their threats more seriously or tried to address them earlier, none of this would have happened. But guilt wouldn't help me. I needed a plan. If the law was letting the HOA push me around, I'd take matters into my own hands. My first step was to gather evidence. I drove around a perimeter of the fancy new subdivision in my dusty pickup truck. Brick columns and shiny metal gates lined the entrance. A tasteful sign read, "Highland Ridge, a gated community for distinctive living." Distinctive, all right. Distinctly immoral, if you ask me. I circled the area until I found a storage lot hidden behind some hedges, separated from the main road by a tall fence. Through the chain link, I spotted a row of trailers, including one that looked suspiciously like the one they used to haul away my animals. It was unmarked, but I recognized a dent on the side and the fresh hay scattered around the wheels. My heart squeezed at the thought of my goats standing in there, crying out for freedom. But the place was locked up tight, and a sign warned, "Private property, no trespassing." Frustration pushed me to consider something reckless, a nighttime rescue mission. Breaking in, though, would put me in legal hot water. And ironically, The HOA would probably play victim, brand me as a trespasser, or have me arrested. That wouldn't get my animals back. If I was going to beat them, I needed something bigger than a one-man infiltration. I needed to show the town and the county just how dirty Highland Ridge really was. So I started digging. Old newspaper archives, county records, anything I could find about the farmland rezoning. I discovered that the developers lobbied the county commission, promising better roads and bigger tax revenues if they expanded the HOA's control. They pulled strings behind closed doors. The chain of signatures was all there in black and white. This was bigger than some petty neighbors complaining about farm smells. It was a coordinated money grab, done so quietly most folks in town never noticed. My next stop was the local feed store. People around here talked freely, and I'd known the manager, Carla, since I was a kid. Maybe she'd heard something. Sure enough, Carla leaned over the counter. Her brow creased in concern. "I've heard rumors," she whispered. "A friend who works construction said the HOA plans to build a high-end clubhouse for members, right where your main barn stands." My skin prickled. So that was the end game. They wanted my land, bar and all, cleared out for some fancy clubhouse. Confiscating my animals was just the first step toward pushing me off my property. Fury and determination swirled inside me, twisting together in a tight knot. Carla reached out to grip my arm. "Listen, you're not the first they've strong-armed. Some folks sold their houses cheap just to escape the legal fees. But I'll tell you, there's a lawyer over in the next county, Harriet Jenkins. She hates HOAs. She's helped a few farmers fight back. You should talk to her." I thanked Carla and hit the road. On the drive, I dialed Harriet's number. She answered with a brisk, no-nonsense tone that soothed me. Finally, someone who didn't sound intimidated by these so-called authority figures. After I rattled off the story, stolen animals and all, Harriet let out a low whistle. "Sounds like we got a classic overreach. They have no right to seize private property based on a contested rezoning. Meet me tomorrow in my office. Bring every scrap of evidence you have." I breathed easier for the first time since this nightmare began. Maybe, just maybe, I'd found an ally who could help me. I ended the call and stared out at the darkening sky. I knew I had a tough battle ahead, but a glimmer of hope rose in my chest. If these people thought they could bully me into giving up my heritage, they were in for a surprise. My next move would be quiet, strategic, like gathering kindling before a bonfire. But when the sparks finally flew, the HOA would see just how hot things could get. The next morning, I pulled up to a modest brick building at the edge of the next county, a far cry from the glossy towers of downtown lawyers. A small plaque by the door read, "Law Offices of Harriet E. Jenkins." Inside, the waiting room smelled of fresh coffee and dusty legal tomes. Harriet looked exactly how she sounded on the phone, sharp-eyed, gray-haired, and radiating the tough confidence of someone who'd been battling powerful interests her entire career. We sat in a cramped conference room while I spread out the documents I collected, newspaper clippings, rezoning forms, that letter demanding HOA membership, and even the slip of paper they'd given me when they took my animals. Harriet's eyes narrowed at the fine print. They got a tricky clause in here about community standards and special emergency actions. If the county granted them the authority, they can interpret it as they see fit, within reason. Stealing livestock is within reason now. I scoffed. She pushed her wire-rimmed glasses up her nose. Absolutely not. But you'll need more than moral outrage to win. If they claim your farm is within their boundaries, the courts often side with the written contract. We need to prove they overstepped, either by forging boundaries, bypassing the correct procedures, or violating fundamental property rights. Harriet tapped a pen on the table. And there's a bigger angle here, the forced annexation. If we show how they manipulated the zoning board, we may be able to invalidate their claim. Though the room was chilly, a warmth spread through my chest. Finally, someone who believed I had a fighting chance. "How do we start?" She offered a grim smile. "We file a civil complaint immediately, force them to justify their actions in court. In the meantime, we can request an injunction requiring the HOA to return your livestock." I placed my palm on the stack of papers, as if to steady them. And to steady myself, I can't pay a fortune in legal fees, I admitted quietly. Harriet gave me a sympathetic nod. We'll figure something out. My father was a farmer, too. I'm not letting these corporate-minded HOAs run roughshod over another family's legacy. She handed me a few forms. Fill these out. I'll file today. Leaving Harriet's office, I felt a surge of renewed energy. There was a path forward, even if it was uphill. But the best battles often are. On the drive back, I couldn't stop thinking of my animals. Where were they? Did the HOA stash them in some locked barn, or had they sold them off to cover my so-called fines? A cold dread settled in my gut. I prayed they were safe. Once home, I saw my phone blinking with unread messages. One was from Linda Harvey, the HOA president, her voice dripping with smug courtesy. Hello. We're calling to remind you of your unpaid balance. We also want to ensure the livestock remain healthy during this transitional phase of membership. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to arrange a settlement. Her words landed like a punch. They wanted me to pay them for the privilege of getting back my own animals. Instead of calling Linda, I rang Harriet with the update. She told me to keep all communications documented. Record if I could. And whatever you do, she said firmly, don't sign anything. That evening, I paced around my empty barn, stopping at each stall where my goats should have been dozing or each perch in the chicken coop that was now silent. On impulse, I drove out to the locked storage lot I'd spotted before. Security lights buzzed overhead. My breath fogged in the chill air as I peered through the chain-link fence. Sure enough, there were no animals in sight, only that lonely trailer. A camera perched on a corner post like a metal vulture, scanning back and forth. The message was clear. We have your animals, and we're daring you to trespass. In the days that followed, Harriet filed our lawsuit, and I braced for the backlash. The HOA responded swiftly. I received a thick envelope stuffed with legal jargon and a notice of a hearing in 2 weeks' time. The letter insisted that I was subject to compulsory arbitration for the terms of the Highland Ridge membership contract. I read it twice and burst out laughing. Membership contract? I'd never signed one. Their arrogance was almost comical. Almost. Word spread around town that I was taking on Highland Ridge. A few neighbors stopped by with encouragement, telling me their own stories of being pressured to sell. A retired couple, the Johnsons, confessed the HOA had pestered them relentlessly about fence regulations until they gave in and moved. They wanted our land for a bigger greenbelt, Mrs. Johnson said, her voice trembling. We just couldn't fight it anymore. Well, I could, and I would, yet I knew I couldn't do it alone. One particular evening, as I was reviewing the thick stack of paperwork Harriet had given me, my phone beeped with a text. It was from Carl at the feed store. Check your email, urgent. I hopped onto my computer and found a message containing a scanned document. It was a letter Carla's friend in construction had received from the HOA, offering a bonus if they could pave a new access road through farmland recently acquired by the association. The farmland in question? Mine. The letter had a signature line from Linda Harvey herself. I felt my heartbeat hammer. This was the proof Harriet had been waiting for. Clear evidence they were dealing behind the scenes to develop my land while claiming it was under HOA jurisdiction. It undermined their entire story that they were just concerned neighbors. They'd been planning the takeover for months, maybe years. I fired off the document to Harriet, along with a message. We've got them. Let's end this. Within minutes, she replied, Good work. This changes everything. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, hopeful that justice might actually prevail, but I still worried about the physical welfare of my animals. No legal victory would matter if they were gone or mistreated. As the hearing approached, I found myself checking every corner of my property, expecting more HOA trespassers. Each day that passed without my animals felt like a hole in my chest. I took a quiet oath in the dark of my empty barn. If they so much as harmed one feather on my chickens or made a single goat suffer, they'd regret it. I'd make sure they paid dearly for what they'd done. The time for gentle negotiation had passed. Now it was war. On the morning of the court hearing, a sharp autumn wind cut across the county courthouse steps. I clutched a folder packed with evidence. My best Sunday shirt too thin for the chill. Harriet walked beside me, briefcase in hand, calm and poised. She looked as if she'd done this 1,000 times, probably because she had. But for me, this was uncharted territory. I wasn't used to formal proceedings and polished arguments. I was used to fixing fences, baling hay, and feeding goats at dawn. Inside the courtroom, the HOA's representatives sat at a polished table, their lawyers practically gleaming in their expensive suits. Linda Harvey was there, wearing that same tight-lipped smile as if she'd already won. The judge, a tall man with tired eyes, called the session to order. Harriet presented our evidence meticulously. She showed the questionable rezoning documents, the notice of forced membership, and the letter I'd received when they seized my animals. Then, with a flourish, she produced a scanned document Carla had uncovered, the one about paving a new access road. The fine print revealed how the HOA planned to use my farmland for a luxury clubhouse, even though the property was never legally transferred. Linda's lawyers tried to argue that I'd been given multiple warnings, and that my refusal to comply justified their action. But Harriet countered by pointing out that, technically, I'd never agreed to any membership, and the forced annexation was still tied up in legal disputes. The judge frowned as he flipped through the documents. He seemed particularly concerned about the livestock seizure. I clenched my jaw, waiting. When Linda Harvey took the stand, she tried to weave a tale of protecting the community's standards. She droned on about how uncontrolled livestock can pose health hazards and property values could be affected. Harriet pounced, asking if property values had anything to do with the newly planned clubhouse. Linda's face hardened. "We're merely following the guidelines set forth in the association's charter," she said in a clipped tone. Harriet presented the construction letter to Linda. "Is this your signature, Mrs. Harvey?" Linda's eyes flickered to the judge, then back to Harriet's outstretched hand. She nodded slowly. Harriet pressed on, voice resonating in the silent courtroom. "So you freely admit that you planned construction on farmland you didn't own, farmland you were forcing into the HOA by questionable means, farmland from which you seized animals without a final legal determination of your authority?" Her lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The judge's disapproval was palpable. He ordered a brief recess, during which Harriet leaned over to me, her eyes bright. "We've got them cornered," she whispered. When court resumed, the judge delivered a stern rebuke to the HOA, calling their annexation tactics highly irregular and legally unsubstantiated. He demanded the immediate return of my goats and chickens, plus compensation for any damages or mistreatment. Hearing that, relief and anger swirled inside me like a storm. All I could think was, I want my animals back now. The HOA's legal team requested an appeal, but the judge refused to delay the livestock's return. No further harm should come to these creatures, he said firmly. Any additional interference with the rightful owner's property will result in contempt of court. That afternoon, Harriet and I waited at the storage lot with a court order in hand. Linda Harvey stood by, arms folded, while a hired caretaker reluctantly led my goats out of a makeshift pen. They looked a little skittish but unhurt, and my chickens flapped around in a large cage nearby, obviously distressed but alive. The caretaker mumbled something about temporary holding and proper diet, but I barely listened. My heart pounded as I coaxed each animal into my trailer, reassuring them they were finally safe. Once they were all accounted for, Harriet and I locked eyes. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "We've got restitution to pursue, and the question of your land zoning status is still open. But you have your animals back. That's a big step." I patted the neck of my favorite goat, a stubborn old fellow named Ranger, and felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was speaking to Harriet, the goat, or the universe itself. Maybe all three. Back at the farm, the animals seemed relieved to be on familiar ground. The chickens clucked excitedly, scratching at the dirt. The goats bleated, exploring their stalls like they were discovering them for the first time. It brought tears to my eyes, though I tried to hide it. This land, my family's land, was meant for them as much as it was meant for me. No HOA would ever change that fact. In the weeks that followed, Harriet hammered away at the legalities. She filed a separate lawsuit for damages, citing emotional distress and financial loss from the days I was without my livestock. I had to appear again in court, but this time with the weight of victory behind me. And sure enough, the HOA's momentum had sputtered. Their leadership was under scrutiny for misappropriation of funds, forging rezoning papers, and who knew what else. Linda Harvey resigned her position, leaving the next HOA president scrambling to pick up the pieces of a scandal that rocked the entire development. Turns out a handful of honest members within Highland Ridge had never agreed to these strong-arm tactics. They publicly condemned the board's actions, demanding a complete overhaul. As for me, I stood my ground. With Harriet's help, we managed to have my land formally recognized as outside the HOA's reach. The judge declared the annexation invalid. I still remember the sweet rush of vindication when I saw it in writing. My farm stood sovereign, free from the demands of any homeowners association. Furthermore, the HOA was ordered to pay me a settlement large enough to cover legal fees and a modest sum for damages. I didn't walk away rich. Money wasn't why I fought in the first place, but it felt like justice. One crisp morning, as I raked hay into the barn, Linda Harvey herself appeared at my gate. She looked thinner, her eyes puffy, like someone who'd lost more than a job, maybe her entire sense of certainty. I came to apologize, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I took it too far. We all did. I leaned on my rake, studying her. Part of me wanted to rage, to shout every insult imaginable, but I didn't have the energy. After all, she wasn't the only one who paid a price. You owe me a lot more than an apology, I finally said, turning back to my work. She stood there a moment, shoulders sagging, then walked away without another word. I didn't stop her. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone see your back. Today, I still wake early and feed my animals, just like my father and grandfather did. The difference is, I carry a new kind of pride. I defended my family's legacy against a horde of bureaucrats who thought they could steamroll me. They stole my farm animals for refusing to join their HOA, unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. Now the story's out there, how a single farmer fought back and won. And maybe, just maybe, it'll remind folks that some things are worth protecting, no matter the cost. I'll admit, there are nights I lie awake, thinking about how close I came to losing everything. But all I have to do is step onto my porch, hear the gentle lowing of the cows, the playful bleats of the goats, the rustle of the chickens bedding down for the night, and I know I'm home. This farm is mine, now and always, and no clipboard-wielding association will ever again stand between me and my animals. End of story.